Thanks for coming along. Last week, you might have noticed we talked about toxins, and because detoxification is a big part of herbal medicine, we're going to focus another session on toxins. So last week it was environmental toxins, and this week what we're going to talk about is what we call ingested toxins, or you could call them toxins by choice or not. So some of these things we choose, and some of them are kind of almost forced on us against our will. So I'm going to share quite a few things with you today that'll be quite interesting. And if you want to follow along, there's a QR code in the top corner there. You can scan that with your phone, and that'll take you to the full page with all the research and all the links to the data that we're talking about. So here we go. Great. So as usual, I'm going to share my screen with you and talk you through some of the information, and be prepared to be a little bit shocked with some of the stuff, because I personally, as I did the research and I've gone into what's behind the scenes with all the stuff, I'm really shocked, that it's not talked about more in the mainstream and by the medical profession and by the news media. No surprise, probably. A lot of these things are just sort of kept or swept under the carpet and disregarded and forgotten about. And it's high time that we had a good look at these things. All right, so let's just share the screen here. Okay, so ingested toxins, and there's a lot of them, by the way, and a lot of these things are just actually not even considered as a concern, because our supermarkets and our shops are just full of them. And it's a massive, massive $1 trillion industry around the world is producing all of this, particularly the food. And some of these things are by choice. Some of the toxins we ingest are by choice, but some of them aren't. So a couple that are by choice, the top two here, the most common toxins in the world, probably at the moment still, are alcohol and cigarettes. And of course, vapes, now that vapes have become the trend. So these things aren't without toxic side effects. And you can see here, there's a statistic in 2019 in America. There were more than 2,800 hospitalizations from vapes. This is when they really hit the market big time. And there are significant risks with vaping. So just because you're not smoking cigarettes doesn't mean you're not at risk. And of course, funny thing in New Zealand, they have this, or have had it over the last few years, this goal to go smoke free. And of course, people are going smoke free, but they're getting hooked on vapes. And of course, that doesn't seem to be a problem. That's okay, so long as we're smoke free. So there's a real issue with those, obviously very, very common, popular, addictive substances that are highly toxic. Now, the interesting thing that I should mention about these is the toxic effects don't happen immediately. And so you can get away with smoking and drinking for a number of years, in fact, maybe even decades, before the health effects really start to reveal themselves. So just remember that, because that's a key thing to understand when it comes to toxicity in general. So, and it could be why a lot of these toxins are disregarded, is because the effects are not immediate. It's not like you've been poisoned immediately, although you could do that in a high dosage. Pharmaceutical injury. Now, this is, I guess it's come to the fore a little bit with vaccines and vaccine injuries that have skyrocketed over the last couple of years. But in general, pharmaceutical industry is huge around the world. So if you look at these statistics here, 840,000 hospitalizations, 274 million adverse drug reactions in a year, 128,000 people dying from prescription drugs that were properly prescribed. And they've also, you can look this up on the page, by the way, all the research and data is there, but an increase in hospital admissions, up to 16.5% of hospital admissions caused by adverse drug reactions. Now, this is not vaccine injury. This is just general drugs, prescription drugs. And of course, what happens over time is there's an overprescription of a lot of drugs. particularly steroids, painkillers, steroidal painkillers, and steroids for inflammation, antibiotics. Those are very, very commonly overprescribed drugs. But what happens over time is you get one drug and then another drug and then another drug, and they end up getting layered on top of each other because of the side effects of each drug. And so we get more and more drugs in the body, and you get a cocktail of drugs. And this causes liver damage. So if you're on multiple pharmaceuticals, then it's a really good idea to look at, are there alternatives? Are there natural ways to get off those pharmaceuticals that are safer, have less side effects, and can help your body to heal, which is what the pharmaceuticals don't do. So substances like herbs and nutrients and powerful medicinal foods can be used to help to heal the body and get off those toxic drugs. Of course, processed foods. So a big part of what we talk about with detoxification is getting off the processed food and getting onto whole, natural, plant-based foods, fruits and vegetables. So this is huge. And this is going to come as quite a shock to some of you if you haven't heard these numbers before. But processed foods are right up there with one of the #1 leading causes of disease in the world. And here's an interesting study. So this was published in 2019 by the American Medical Association. They studied 45,000 adults. Now this is really interesting. For 45,000 adults, and they studied them for 9 years, and they were over the age of 45. And what they found was a direct statistical connection between the intake of ultra-processed food, which I should mention is 70% of supermarket food. So most of the food that's being sold to the public. They found a direct statistical connection between this ultra-processed food intake and early death from all causes, but especially cancer and heart disease. And cancer and heart disease, as you may know, are the two leading causes of death. So just pause there for a moment. 70% of the food in our supermarkets has a direct link to early death from all causes, especially cancer and heart disease. Now, this is the next shocking thing. These foods include bread, breakfast cereals. Okay, so how many children are having breakfast cereals and bread? Then you've got instant noodles, chicken and fish nuggets. Now this is processed meat. So processed meat, nitrates, sweets, potato chips, and sugary drinks. So these are some of the chemicals that you'll find in these processed foods. Obviously, artificial sweeteners, sodium benzoate, the nitrates we talked about in the meats, gluten, which binds up the gut and it inflames the gut. And there's other studies there that you might like to look at. But there's a lot of areas that this processed food damages the body, not just being nutrient deficient and full of chemicals and compounds and preservatives, but generally it causes a sluggish digestive pattern and we get a backup in the body. Now, if you add to that too much acid in the diet, I've put a scary picture here of a guy eating a huge slab of meat, because the biggest source of acid in our diet is meat and animal products. So too much protein, basically, because all protein is acid loading the body. So if you go on a keto diet, don't make the mistake of having a lot of protein, because a keto diet is a high fat diet, not a high protein diet. And if you go on too much protein, you'll end up becoming acidic and inflamed, and you'll get metabolic acid accumulation in your body. And so what this does is it causes aches and pains, acid forming in the joints and the tissues, accumulation of acid in the body's tissues, and that causes your body to dump calciums, and you end up with stones, you end up with bone degeneration and osteoporosis and things like that. There's a huge, also powerful connection between acid levels in the body and cancer. So you can have a look at this. There's some quite good research on that as well, and that actually links you to some really good data. But acid is actually a toxin. So when your body becomes over acidic. Now, this is the next one. Also very fascinating is sugar. Now, this is not just sugar we're talking about, but also all of the other types of simple processed carbs fall into this category. And I'll explain why they're toxic in a moment. But, things like modified cornstarch or maltodextrin, and basically modified carbs that have become simplified down into a virtual sugar. And what they do with these products in processing and manufacturing of foods is pump the foods full of these artificial carbohydrates, which are actually even worse for the body than pure sugar. And so they're done in such a way that it's addictive as well. So here we've got another problem with these toxic substances become addictive. And a little bit of a theory behind that is that they interfere with our body chemistry, toxins. And by interfering with our body chemistry, they interfere with our processing of life, of the energy, of the emotions, of the mental process of everything. And by interfering with that, they cause us to sort of sweep it under the carpet. And so it becomes more and more addictive to turn to those substances. So those simple carbs are highly toxic in a similar way to any other drug. And I've often likened sugar to a drug like cocaine. Powerfully stimulating, powerfully addictive, and you keep going back for more. So there's that toxic effect of the addiction, but there's also the toxic effect on our metabolism, because the sugars accumulate to a certain level in the blood, and then they'll go into another form called glycogen, which gets stored in the muscle tissue and also in the liver. And of course, we can store so much in our muscle tissue, but then it starts to get stored in our liver. And the stores in our liver, when they get too much, or when the liver can't store anymore, it has to convert it into fat. The body has to convert this excess sugar into fat. And so what we end up with is a fatty liver. And there's a huge number of the population with undiagnosed fatty liver. They estimate up to about 40%, I think it is. So a vast number of us have a fatty liver due to the overconsumption of processed carbs. And of course, the liver controls cholesterol manufacture and distribution in the body. 80% of it's controlled by your liver. So you end up with insulin imbalances, sugar imbalance, sugar metabolism imbalance, fat metabolism imbalance, cholesterol metabolism imbalance, and you end up with what's called a metabolic syndrome. So metabolic syndrome is a result of processed food and too much acid food and too much protein. And when you combine these things, you end up with this metabolic, that's also called a metabolic disease. And surprisingly, the condition includes blood pressure, blood sugar, fat around the waist, and high blood fats or cholesterol. So when you've got two or more of these, you've got basically metabolic syndrome or metabolic disease. And here's another interesting fact. Metabolic syndrome is a disorder of energy utilization and storage, and it's up to 34% of the adult population that suffer with it. And there's a nice little video here, if you go onto the page, that explains more about metabolic syndrome. But it's actually the largest epidemic in history. And a very interesting fact about metabolic syndrome is that they've connected it with, well, back in the days when there was quite a few COVID deaths, the most common predetermined underlying factor or risk factor was metabolic syndrome. So the people that were dying that had COVID, the majority of them had this metabolic syndrome. And it was the most common underlying factor also for cancer and for heart disease. Interestingly, the two biggest causes of death. Now you can directly link this to processed food, overconsumption of processed food. The largest epidemic in history. And here we go, the biggest killers, cancer and heart disease, directly related to that. So if we go back a few steps, you can see how this toxicity can lead to these things, and how this gradual metabolic buildup of toxins over a long period of time can lead to a metabolic disease, which can spill over into the leading causes of death. And of course, this doesn't happen quickly. And we've talked about previously about, servicing your vehicle, doing it once a year, going on a clean diet for a couple of weeks, and doing this kind of cleanse, which is, one of the secrets of herbal healing, detoxification and cleansing. So have we drunk the toxic Kool-Aid? This is just an analogy here of, someone drinking radioactive liquid. Well, we're not drinking radioactive liquid, are we? But we are drinking stuff that's been made and sold to us by the food giants. And our government and our health system is really doing nothing much. They're not really talking about it. They're not really doing much about it, or teaching us or educating us about these things, which they should be. And that's why I'm here. That's why I'm doing this, because I feel there's a desperate need for the public to know what's going on. Why are we dying? Why are we getting sicker? Why are we weaker? You only have to go for a walk around the shopping mall to see, we're not a healthy people. We're not a healthy population. And the drugs aren't healing us. They might be keeping us alive like zombies, but they're not healing us. And we need healing. So it's the unpalatable truth. And next time, what I'll talk about is what we can do about it. Well, maybe we'll dig into some of the specific health issues and what we can do about those things, how we can use some of the food and some of the herbs to actually target different areas and to heal our body. And we'll be talking about these things in the weeks to come. So I'll just stop sharing here for a minute. And I just want to wind up by thanking you. If you've been here and you've watched this video to the end, thanks again. Please subscribe, join our channel, and we'll keep you informed, and we'll keep updating you with more herbal healing secrets as the weeks go by. So you have a great week, and I hope I haven't scared you too much, but maybe, do a bit more investigation. And, knowledge is power, and that's what we want to do. We want to empower you, give you the tools to take control of your own health destiny. So have a great week, and we'll talk again soon.